So we know Iroh learned balance from the four nations, but what exactly did he adapt from each of them to apply to his personal life? Let's discuss. Hey folks, welcome to the Geek Talk. Today, let's discuss all the ways the four nations helped Iroh become the most complete, non-Avatar character we've seen in the franchise. And when I say non-Avatar, I mean like non-Avatar in that he can't possess all four elements at the same time. Not that he's a non-Avatar character, like he's from a different franchise or something like that. Anyway, I think you guys know what I mean. From his adoption of water to lightning, air for spirituality, and even earth for neutral Jing. Let's get into the discussion. First, let's start with water, as that's the most obvious influence and a good piece of groundwork for the rest of this discussion. Sometime after the death of his son Liu Tin, it would seem Iroh took some time to himself, probably to travel the world to find the answers of the man he should have been. Part of his travels probably led him to the Northern Water Tribes, where he gathered a deeper understanding of the art of redirection from waterbenders. After spending time with and observing the waterbenders, he eventually came up with an entirely new ability called lightning redirection. Of course, we first saw this when he did it to Azula at the beginning of Book 2, but we didn't get more insight about this until later when he taught it to Zuko. With Earth, we see that Iroh likely adopted the concepts of neutral Jing. In the behind-the-scenes commentary of Sokka's master from Book 3, Sifu Kishu mentions that Iroh always waits for the perfect moment to strike, and he hardly ever uses unnecessary movement, efficient in combat and in his strategy. And we know that Earthbenders do this too, particularly Master Earthbenders like King Bumi. And for Iroh, we can see examples of this in all of his fights, like how he waited for the eclipse to escape the prison, much like Bumi did when he freed Omashu. It's very likely that during Iroh's travels, he interacted with Earthbenders who taught him the art of neutral Jing. Heck, it might have been King Bumi himself who taught Iroh once they both started messing around with the White Lotus. When it comes to fire, his natural element, we know right away what he learned, and it was from the original firebenders, the dragons. We as fans are still unsure when Iroh interacted with the dragons. I personally think it was after his failure at Ba Sing Se, but others argue that he met them prior, especially since he was known as the Dragon of the West at that time. Either way, Iroh learned a very valuable lesson from the dragons in realizing that the strength of firebending didn't come off the back of anger or aggression, but from the life fire could bestow. And finally, when it comes to air, this was probably the hardest for Iroh to gain any insight on since, his people nearly wiped out all the airbenders. But even before properly meeting Aang in Book 2, at least where they weren't fighting each other and just talking, Iroh seemed very in touch with his spiritual side. So much so that he saw Roku's dragon flying through the air, even though Roku's dragon at the time was a spirit, not an actual dragon. This ability, of course, probably came near the end of Iroh's life after he learned from all the other nations. So it's likely he learned his super spirituality after honing his craft with fire, then learning from the waterbenders, and then interacting with King Bumi and the other earthbenders to learn about neutral Jing. But all of these together is what culminated in him basically being able to project himself straight into the spirit world. Most times when people die, they kind of just go off into the ether. Sometimes they show up in the spirit world, sometimes they don't. But with Iroh, he actively put himself into the spirit world. One could even theorize that before Iroh passed himself into the spirit world, something many humans are incapable of doing, even other airbenders, that he may have had formal training with Aang at some point. But what do you all think? Do you think Iroh learned something special from each bending type, and that was the reason he held such a deep well of power, which eventually led him to ascending directly into the spirit world? Or do you think Iroh did it all on his own or learned some other abilities I didn't speak about in this video? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, peace, love, and remember, be water, my friends.